Hello everyone, welcome back to Intro to Processing. Lesson 7 is going to be our final lesson, and as a culminating project we're going to be developing the game through what we've learned throughout the course. So the idea for the game is to basically have a type of, cookie clicker type game where either a rectangle or a circle will spawn in a random location on the canvas. Score will be counted at the top, and basically we're going to be just having this random spawning behavior, testing whether when the person clicks if it's in the shape or not, and just having that game go on infinitely. So let's start coding. So now one thing that might be unfamiliar to you in Python, that's not processing specific, are classes, or some might call them objects. We're going to be using them quite a bit here for our circles and rectangle. I guess we're going to make an object for each one of them. It's going to make our life a little bit easier. So if you're unfamiliar with objects or classes, maybe look up a video or check out W3 Schools and see what they have to say about them. But we're going to be using them here. So our first object is going to be a circle. Of course, we're going to have to initialize it. And it's basically just going to say self, of course, and after our x, y, and radius optimally. And after, you're just going to be assigning it, so self.x equals x, then after, copy and paste that a couple times for our y, and then for radius. Next, what we're going to do is going to add our collision detection. So I think a good name for this function would be to see mouse object collision. And here, of course, going to be passing in self, but we're also going to be getting mouse x. I would use mouse x here, but since it's turning pink, I don't want to be like overriding that in any manner. So I'm just probably gonna say maybe x mouse and after y mouse. Because I'm just thinking when I'm going to pass in mouse x and mouse y to this function. I could just use mouse x in here, but I feel like just to make everything nice and cleaner, I'm just gonna pass them in as arguments. So here we're just going to be using our normal circle collision detection, which is going to say basically if dist from x mouse and y mouse to self.x and self.y is lesser than or equal to the radius, which is, self.radius, going to return true, else we're going to return false. So now basically how this works is that if we define a circle, let's see here, actually one more thing we should add to this is its draw. So we say def, and then after draw shape, and of course passing in self as always, basically just going to say ellipse self.x, self.y, self.radius, self.radius again. Actually, I made a mistake here. This should be self.radius times 2 because that's the width and the height. So it's going to have to be double the radius. Okay, perfect. So now if we make a new circle, we can just say test equals circle, and we'll just say the x and y is going to be maybe 100, 100, and radius is going to be, let's say, 25. And let's test.draw shape. If we run that program, getting an error. Let's see where that leading it up. There we go. Spare closing bracket right here, not needed. There you go, it's booting up actually. One thing I should do just so that you can see the whole thing is just change our size briefly. There you go, and I'm gonna show it to all of you guys. Here we go. So now we see here is that our circle is showing up. We're using the draw shape instead of just drawing it manually. So now one thing we can do is just check if the collision detection works. But remember that mouse pressed, which is going to be the function that we're using, needs to have setup. And and draw loop running, and the draw loop running. So instead of just setting up this, what I'm just going to do is rough bug testing, just define setup, put all this in here, and of course maybe make test a global. Then after I'm just going to define draw. Just because we're not going to be modifying test, we could just say test dot draw shape. Take it out of here. Here we go. And now when mouse is pressed, what we can do is just say if test dot mouse object collision, and we're just going to be passing in mouse X and mouse Y. Then I want to print clicked. So now when I run this program, any errors? Let's see, there are no errors. Let's change our screen. Here we go. So now we see here that everything's being drawn. Let me just bring up the console so that we can see anything's being printed. So now I'm clicking, nothing seems to be showing up. I clicked in the circle and there you go, perfect. Collision detection is working. Gonna click right near the edge, there you go. So our circle collision detection is moving, and the nice, I guess, fun thing about this is that basically now we could just create a circle anywhere. So we could just say any circle with an X, a Y, and a radius, and it's gonna handle collision detection and drawing itself all for us. All we have to do is call those functions, which is great. Let's now make a similar one for a rectangle. So I'm just going to do this right here, and I'm just going to copy and paste it. I'm just going to say rectangle. And this one, we're going to say X, Y, and then after we're going to do width and height. And you see here, actually, width turns white, so I'm just going to use W for that. Just so that we don't interfere with anything. So same thing here, just going to do same X and Y, and instead now we're just going to add in W and H. Now for the draw self, just going to be modifying that. We're going to do rect, and then after it's going to be self dot width and self dot height. Now the main part that we have to change here is our mouse object collision. So we're still going to be keeping X, Y, and Y mouse, but instead of that now we're just going to be doing our rectangle collision detection. So what we can do here is actually, if we reference our lesson 6, one moment. We can actually just refresh our minds as to how we did the rectangle collision. So we see here it's just 4 statements. So what we can do here is say if, let's delete all this. So if x mouse is greater than our self.x and x mouse is lesser than our self.x plus our self.w, because that's our width. So that should be square in the middle of our rectangle. And then after, it's just going to be the same thing. So we do and. Just going to copy and paste this to save some time. We say y mouse is greater than our self.y, and y mouse is lesser than self.y plus self.h. That should be our finished collision detection for our rectangle. So what we can do to test this, say here, rectangle, make sure that's capital. And because I'm expecting 4 arguments, let's say it's going to be 100 long and 50 tall. And all this should still work, so I'm going to run this function here. Going to change our view. Here we go. So now, I guess it's being drawn, perfect. Let's bring up our console to see. So now I'm clicking, nothing seems to be happening. I'm going to click a corner, and there you go. It's working. So I'm clicking all around it, nothing should be happening. I'm going to click just this corner here, and there you go, clicked. Clicked, clicked. Perfect. So now we have our 2 objects or classes ready. And now basically all we have to do is code our game logic. And that's just going to be our main draw loop, which we're going to do in here. So our global setup, we're going to have our active shape. And we're going to keep our size. I think 500 is a good size. Let's actually just revert that so I can test size really quickly. 500, 500 is a good size. I'm going to say that. So we're going to keep 500, 500. Let's just redo what I did there and just say active shape. 500, 500 is a good size. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to initialize our active shape. So what we can do is we're going to be using Python's random number generator. Sorry about that cut, everyone. I had to refresh myself on how to use random numbers. So first thing that we want to do is import our random module, which is just default in Python. It's going to allow us to use what we're going to use here to pick which shape. It's going to be, just to test it out, we're just going to say random.random.randint, and it's going to be between 0 and 1. So when you print that, let me see, bring up our console, you see that it's going to print something between 0 and 1, which is perfect. And now we're going to use that. Basically, we're just going to say if, this. So it's going to say 0 would normally come back false, and 1 would come back true. We're just going to say print we have a 1, and then else print we have a 0. So you see that both are coming back. So now basically this is going to be our true, false, or circle, rectangle scenario. I'm thinking that what we can do, because we're going to be repeating it in the setup and whenever mouse pressed comes back true, I'm going to make a function which is going to be define, and it's going to be generate new shape. And we can say here that we don't really need anything to be passed in. We're going to just copy paste this. We do need to have global active shape here because we are going to be modifying it. So now, if it comes back as a 1, we're going to say this is our circle case, is our 1. So we're going to say that active shape equals circle. But now you might see an issue. What are we going to use for our x and y and our radius here? So what we can do is we're just going to say that our x is going to be, again, we're going to be using random.randint. We want it to be somewhere in our canvas, but and we know our canvas is 500, 500. We see right here, perfect. Because I don't really want it spawning too close to the edges, we're just going to say maybe let's have it between, for our x, 50 and 450. Now for our y, because we're going to have our score display at the top, I'm going to probably make this 100 450, just so that it doesn't maybe overlap any text at the top. And let's change this to y. Our radius, which I'm just going to use r for, let's make that, it could be basically anything. So let's try to make this between 10 and let's say 100. That should be a good amount. So now, whenever we have a circle, we're just going to use these for our values, and that's going to be our new active shape. Next, for our rectangle, we're going to be doing something very similar. So I'm just going to keep the x and y logic, that's fine. For our width and our height, I'm just going to basically be duplicating this and maybe making this a little bit bigger. So there we go. Now also we have to change this. Rectangle. Say x, y, width, height. Perfect. So now we have our generate new shape. And whenever this starts, we want to call generate new shape. And that's going to make our new shape for us. Now in our draw, what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be calling active shape dot, and remember it's draw shape dot draw shape. Perfect. So this should work, hopefully, and I believe it is. So let's pull up our display here. Perfect. So now we see that well, I clicked my mouse so it errors out, so I'm just going to comment this out for now because we haven't coded in our collision logic. So let's call that back. So you see here that now when I click it, let's make this a bit smaller for our screen here. This is the entire canvas, perfect. So now, see here that this is a random rectangle that shows up. And when I stop the program and run it again, see that there's another type of rectangle. And when I run it again, see that this time there's another type of rectangle. And eventually, one of these times, you should be able to get a circle. One of these times. Basically flipping a coin here. There we go, finally, a circle. So you see now we have a circle in here as well, which is perfect. So, now it's basically just going to be coding our mouse collision logic, and then after our score. So first, for our mouse collision logic, we're just going to be doing if active shape dot mouse object collision mouse y. What we're going to do is just call generate new shape again. So now what this should be able to do is just have an infinite loop of shapes. So let me change our view. Perfect. So now I'm clicking, nothing's happening. I'm going to click this. See, another one spawns, another one, and another one, and another one. Now the reason they're stacking up like this is because we haven't called background in our draw. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. So now we're going to call background here. Let's just say something like 240. Should be fine for our purposes. Stop the program again. Let's run it again. And change our view, update it, and there you go, perfect. So now we have a background. Whenever you click a shape, a new one shows up. Which is perfect. This is our main game logic. And it is quite addictive. Okay, enough playing, back to coding. So now, the only thing that we really have left to do is to add our score. So one thing I'm going to do now is at the top here in our setup, I'm actually going to add a score global. And I'm just going to initialize score. Because we're initializing, this is basically init active shape. And now I'm just going to say score equals 0 so that we can init or initialize our score. And every time that mouse pressed is called and comes back true, what we're going to do is, because we're going to be modifying score, just say global score. And we're just going to say score equals score plus 1. Now all we need to do is display this. So you can just use our text here. And one thing I'm just going to do, make our lives a little bit easier. I'm just going to say text align is center. So now what we're going to do is have a background here, and we're just going to say text. And our text is going to be score. Actually, let's make a variable for this. Maybe make it easier. Just going to say that our what's a good name for this? It's going to be, I guess, text score, because we're going to be after converting it. It's going to say our text score is equal to our, it's going to be score, and then after it's going to be plus, it's going to be our string, and it's going to be our score. Because remember, you can't, when you're adding strings, you can't just add in a integer, which our score is going to be. So what we're going to have to do just for that is convert it to a string here. So now we could say text is going to be our text score, which you just made up there. And we could say that it's going to be right in the center of our canvas, so 250, maybe 40 down. You can always change this. And that should be good to go. One thing I notice is that it is a bit dark, so I'm just going to fill this black. And before we draw our shape, you can just fill this back to whatever we were using for that. Let me check what shade we're using before. It's white. So here before the text, we're going to fill it black. And for the shape, we're going to fill it white. Which is perfect. So now, when I change our screen back, this should be our final game. So now we have the rectangle that shows up. When I click it, you see I click it and the score goes up by 1. Again, different shapes popping up, different sizes. You see that the score just keeps growing. And the reason I use text align center is because when score gets big enough, it's going to just, if I use like text align corner, it would go off to the side. but when you use center, it's just going to say nice and centered right here. So that's our game. If you wanted to add color to this, what you could do is maybe just add another thing over here where you just say self.color or self.c, because color is taken. You just do self.c, and then after you generate a random value here using our random.randint, you assign it, and then after you could just fill self.c over here for your color if you wanted to add some color in. But aside from that, that's our game. I hope you enjoyed the course, and good luck in your future coding endeavors.
Bingoa.